Welcome to the Family Skeptical, Parenting Through Nonbelief.
We're a married atheist couple raising two wonderful, strange children. We ask big questions, dissect weird parenting moments, and examine how society ignores or misrepresents families like ours. If you're any stripe of nonbeliever who's involved in raising children, welcome. You are our people.
Our kids have heard all our swears, but yours might not have. So be thoughtful if there are young people listening with you.
Welcome back, moms.
Hey, I'm going to try to let go of my technology irritation.
Okay. It sounds like a good start.
We had a few technical difficulties getting going, but I think we've worked through them. So I realized, except for our final segment, which we talked about in the last episode, I haven't told you anything that I want to talk about.
Nope.
So to start, I thought something really interesting happened that I wanted to bring up because two things occurred that to me are very related. So first, I feel like recently you've been giving me quite a bit of shit about being superstitious. Would you say that that is accurate?
Quite a bit of what?
Shit.
Oh my goodness, moms. The language. I'm just teasing. So add that on top of the superstitious thing.
Yes.
It's not that I'm giving you that. It's that I think it's amusing that we have a skeptical parenting podcast and you also knock on wood constantly.
So I agree, but...
Okay, there it is. Show's over.
No,
oh, wait, we're going to keep going. Okay.
I think you misunderstand when I do those things because I wanted to bring it up because something else happened that I think will clarify it for you.
Please.
So something happened with Reader, and I forget exactly what it was, but he got upset. And you explained to him that in Stoicism, which is something that you like to go to, that it's helpful to not expect things to go perfectly, because then you're not disappointed when things go wrong. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I mean, vaguely, in a parenting is a mile a minute sort of thing.
So I thought that was so interesting because what I had been wanting to explain to you is that is basically what those superstitious things are to me. When I knock on wood, it's not because I think there is any connection to that and how things are going to go. It is me talking to my brain.
Oh, so like Reba McEntire putting her thumb to her pinky when she wants to hit a high note.
Yes, exactly. So it's
That's
like
great. Okay.
When something comes up, it's my note to my brain. Don't get caught on this idea that things are going to go perfectly because they could go wrong. Does that make sense?
That's fine. So you have your own usage of the whole knocking on wood thing that's separate from how other people would view it superstitiously.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay. Solid defense, moms. Next.
Next. So your joke at the beginning of this is perfect because the next thing I wanted to talk about was something that came up in the last episode. Actually, not in the last episode. It came up after I edited the last episode and started thinking about it. Because when I pulled all of the audio from when you were talking with the kids about Easter, most of Go's responses were swears. And when I thought about posting it, I had a little moment and I kind of tried to explain it in the episode description. But I don't think we've ever talked about our feelings about swearing and how we've handled that with the kids. And so I thought that might be interesting to address since it became very clear that it's something we allow. So I will say, I grew up swearing. So I am like your stereotypical only child who had a very close relationship with their parents. I spoke to them like adults. I called them mom and dad. I also called them by their first names. And they swore and I swore, and it was never a big issue. As I have stated in the past, I also was wildly scared about ever getting into trouble. So I never swore at school or in front of any authority figures. I was as well behaved as could be. And that was just my experience. So it was very easy to think about doing the same thing with the kids. On the other hand, I don't think that was your experience at all. So I'm curious how you felt about it and if you had any thoughts about how you wanted to handle it with the kids.
I mean, my experience was different in that I never swore at home around my parents until I was much older. In fact, it wasn't until I was out of the house, and I believe even after college, that I would start swearing in front of my parents. Because, I mean, my parents are not your parents. And It was just something that you didn't do. But as I got older, I ceased to care. And then I started doing it. And I realized that the world would continue to turn on its axis. I do not swear in situations where it's not appropriate. Mm-hmm. And I have found that however liberal we are with the, small L, liberal we are with the children and their use of language, it's really only go. Reader doesn't.
I know.
Not really, but only Go does. Mr. I love to invent new words. So his swears are oftentimes off the cuff, wildly creative, and disjointed. And I love it. I'm all here for it. And I've never gotten any notifications from school, any teachers, anybody, that he's ever been using it inappropriately. I've never had to chastise him about it, except in front of my parents, because my father in particular just goes white as a sheet and makes this crinkly, frowny face whenever he hears Go swear. And Go has made great strides in not swearing in mixed company. And I think that's great. It shows self-control. It shows that he has that whole neuroplasticity thing, and he's able to integrate something he loves into his life without letting it lead him around by the nose. It's all good things. So from a skeptical standpoint, I don't have data pointing to any sort of negative in this situation, except for my dad, in which case he clearly was able to adjust his behavior to defer to the social circumstance. And so I don't have any reason to correct him any further than that, because he's never given me reason to. Not really.
Let's come back to the data.
Sure.
Because I have a question for you.
Please.
But I love that you bring up his creativity, because I feel like my friend's a writer, and she actually wrote an article about whether or not she should let her son swear. Mm-hmm. And she asked if anybody had thoughts on it, and I wrote her a couple things. I think she quoted me in the article.
Oh, that's amazing.
And there's something I usually quote when people ask about this, but I actually think it's a little disingenuous, and I'm not being honest, because what I usually say, I love the play Inherit the Wind. It's not an accurate representation of the Scopes trial, but it's a beautiful play. And Henry Drummond, who's the lawyer in it, who defends the teacher who taught evolution, one of his lines is, "I don't swear just for the hell of it. Language is a poor enough means of communication. I think we should use all the words we've got." And so typically when people ask me about it, that's the response I give. Mm-hmm. But I don't think at the heart of it, that is true. I think at the heart of it is what you said, and that I love creative uses of language. And the people I know who are the most gifted language, does language smith make sense?
Wordsmith?
Yes, wordsmith. There we go. The most gifted wordsmiths I know are also incredibly creative and voracious swearers.
Of course.
And so
why should you wall that off when you can have
exactly.
such joy in your life?
And so to me, it is part of learning to use language creatively. And I think in my mind, it is a true skill and joy to swear well. And so that's why I allowed it and like it. I think to me, the really important thing, which we never do, and which I've never seen the kids do, is to swear at people. That's not how we use that language in our household. And to me, that's a very different thing. But, like a well-turned swear in a moment of frustration or not even frustration is like a beautiful thing. I have to tell the story the first time I really noticed Go swearing. You know what I'm going to say, right? Oh,
you need to share, because it was one of the most iconic Go moments that I think will ever be.
So we were on one of our long drives, and along one of the routes, there are a lot of wind turbines. And we're driving past, and everybody's sort of quiet in the car. And then Go just comes out with, "Look, it's a whole fucking windmill."
Yeah, I don't think I've laughed harder on one of our trips than at that moment.
He was quite young at the time. It was absolutely hilarious. We laughed uproariously, which I think is kind of what led into his swearing, because he definitely realized that it was strongly appreciated. But the data, I was curious, because I have noticed something really recently that I am so curious about. So have you noticed that he has gone from swearing to saying flippin?
Yes.
Okay, so we have never used that word in our household.
Nope.
Because we swear. So I am curious, and I truly don't care if this has happened. Like, I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world if he swore at school and got a reminder about it. But do you think that means that he swore at some point and somebody was like, "No, don't do that, say this"?
I don't know. Have you asked him?
I haven't.
Well, I think that would be a good start.
Okay. It's a mystery.
But you know what? So I'm going to back up a sec, because I'm really curious. Do you think that the defense that you gave when you were talking about Inherit the Wind, the sort of like that intellectual defense that you give for allowing the boys to swear in an appropriate context, that is in your mind now retrospectively like an emotional response and not an intellectual response? Is that why you're giving yourself grief for it? Like you're saying these things in defense of our kids using swear words sometimes because you love them, you think it's amusing, you want to support their creativity, but ultimately you feel like they shouldn't be doing it, and you're just
not at all,
because you love them. Okay,
not at all. I feel like that quote places it as being the clearest communication, and I actually don't think in most times it is. I think I love it because sometimes it can be the most creative and expressive. So that's why I think it's disingenuous, because I don't think it usually is. Like, I don't think most people are using swear words because that's what makes people understand stuff the best. I actually don't think that's what it is at all. I think it's because it is creative, and it is, I think, more emotionally expressive than something else.
Exactly what I was about to say, that I view using that sort of language as an example of a person who has less of a barrier between how they put things into words than some other people might. Like, you have a feeling, you have a thought, just letting it come out and having it be clear, communicated well, irrespective of language is important, right? But I think that having that ability to allow for your exact emotional state through the words you choose, I think is important. Like, we're a social species. And the English language in particular has a rich tradition of wonderful writers, playwrights, inventing marvelous foul turns of phrase. Like, I'm looking at you, Oscar Wilde and Shakespeare, right? There should be no barrier in my mind. And I understand some people have sort of like this decorum threshold. And I think most people have a decorum threshold. Like, there are certain times, like even George Carlin, if he was in front of, his dying grandmother, unless the joke was really good, he probably wouldn't be swearing up one side and down the other, right? Like, there are times and places where it really isn't appropriate, except for certain usages. I will pivot quickly to giving the brief anecdote about Gilbert Gottfried. Some of you might know the joke, The Aristocrats. Gilbert Gottfried, shortly after 9/11, was emceeing an event with other comics, or maybe it was just his turn at the microphone. I don't exactly remember the context, but it was him and a bunch of other comics, and in an auditorium or a theater or whatever, and it was an official event, right? And he did a 9/11 joke. The brave soul that he was did a 9/11 joke, and he was getting shouts of "too soon, too soon." It was inappropriate, and so to pivot, as a master humorist as he was, he went right into The Aristocrats, which is itself a joke with a million ways that you could tell it. Every comedian that tells it in their own way. It's this sort of chameleon of a joke, and it is notorious within the trade. And he nailed it. He had everybody in the palm of his hand by the end of that joke, crying with laughter, with catharsis, because they had all just, as humorists, lived through this nationally traumatic, culturally traumatic event. And he used not just humor, but if you know The Aristocrats, it is potentially one of the most foul jokes you can tell. But the language, in context, was perfect. And it allowed everybody that catharsis because of how over the top it was. Your thoughts, Mom?
I don't know if that's exactly how that story went, but
that is how that story went.
Okay.
How do you think that story went?
I don't know for sure. So we'll say that's how it went. But no, I 100% agree. People who do it correctly and with verve, it's a little view into the heart of someone sometimes.
Yeah.
So that is why you heard ghost swearing, and why we allow it in our house. And if we figure out the mystery of flippin, we will let you know.
Yeah, I'm really curious now. I just let it go. I was like, oh, this is interesting. Maybe he just heard one of his YouTubers say it, and now he likes it, and now he's using it all the time. Maybe he likes it because he feels like he should be able to express like that, in that vein, all the time.
Yeah.
And so in flippin', he can, in public, say flippin' as much as he wants. He can remake it. He can twist it. He can be as inventive as he wants in every context with flippin'. I think it's brilliant.
I had
just
not
like
thought
the
of-
other F word, that it is itself just a simple, but nonetheless Swiss Army knife approach to profanity.
I had not thought of YouTube. We're going to have to figure this out.
Yeah. Well, we know that reader says, let's go, because of certain YouTubers saying it constantly on their, like, video game playthroughs, follow along, whatever.
Yeah.
It's incessant. It's really incessant. Anyway, moving on.
Sex. So.
It's fun.
It is.
That's it for this episode of The Family Sketch.
So this is actually backwards.
Because Austin Powers. Yes, please.
Okay. The conversation about violence in media
yes,
actually occurred to me because I first wanted to talk about sex in media. So we're doing this the opposite way as it came up in my brain. And what made me think of it originally is, it's just horrible. But, currently in the US, there is a huge war against drag. And in a lot of the conservative media and the conservative attacks on drag performances, those are often framed as being, they frame it as being too sexual for children. Now, that framing is wrong on about every level that it could be. Because one, the drag events that children attend are very different than drag events for adults. And so it is not sexual. I also, which I don't think we have time to get in here, but at least the adult-themed drag events that I've seen, I would categorize as much more bawdy than sexual.
Yeah.
But it was one of those times where I was thinking about it, and I feel like even if they were right, that these events were sexual in some way, it made me think about sex in media and why we are so scared about kids seeing something sexual way more than other things, way more than violence, way more than just about anything else, right? And when I was growing up, I had read a lot of articles and different things about this and how particularly in the US, we have this total comfort with violent media and yet have all of these strict rules about sexual media. And I always thought that was sort of wrong and backwards, and certainly thought that I wouldn't treat it that way with my kids. But as we discussed last week, I feel like in some ways, certainly not as much as some people, but in some ways I have been more careful about the sexual content I've shown the kids than the violent content. And so I was thinking about all of this and then thought about that dichotomy and wanted to discuss it. It seems particularly poignant to me because as somebody who was at one time very interested in working in film and TV and potentially creating things for film and TV, when I was growing up, the media that made me want to get into that industry was all very sexual and quite complexly so. So I wanted to talk about this and see if you thought we were more cautious about sexual media than violent media with the boys, and if you have sort of thinking about that.
I do have thoughts off the top.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I think the application and intensity matters. I think that, and I'll come back to that because that has to do with how we apply it in our family. But in general, socially, I think parents would be concerned about sexual content in America, not just because of the puritanical nonsense that the country has been saddled with since its inception, but also this sort of like almost religious sense, like small r, like colloquially religious sense about how our children need to be protected. Like, oh, won't somebody please think of the children? It's a joke and it's cliche, but it's kind of true. Like, American society has this sense that the children must be protected from all the things. And so I think part of it is, when seeing sex, that is a more mature part of human relations. And so kids being exposed to sex in some parents' minds might lead them to growing up too quickly, air quotes. You know, it's a preservation of your child's childhood. So whether or not they are ready to see it or not, regardless of how you feel about it, like, you as a parent would potentially limit access to that media because you don't want your kid to grow up too fast or see something they quote unquote shouldn't. I think personally, no offense to anybody in the audience who thinks differently, as always, but I think for me, solid parenting, part of it is giving your kids the opportunity to experience things slightly outside their pay grade, gauging their response, using it as a point of conversation. Like in Terminator, we watched Terminator.
That was the example I wanted to use.
There's a marvelous sex scene in Terminator because the badass hero in the story at that point is still Kyle Reese. He's the fighter. At the end, that flips and Sarah Connor becomes the fighter, necessarily because she's the one who trains up John Connor. No spoiler alerts, the movie's old as dirt. Now, that scene, she has agency. She is the person who has sexual experience, who has been socialized in what we would consider to be a normal sense. He grew up in the rubble of the war with the machines and has had no true romantic relationships. He hasn't really gotten close to anybody. He has lived what Sarah considers to be a sad and lonely life. She has agency. He does not. It is a very tender and romantic scene in the midst of a very violent, like, creature feature, essentially. And I think it's marvelous. It is very well done. It's tastefully done. And, you know, then we could go, okay, like, concurrently to that, you have, like, David Cronenberg stuff, which is sexual. Like, are we going to let our kids watch Videodrome? No, but we would let them watch Terminator. Why wouldn't we let them watch Videodrome? Because it's messed up. Mm-hmm. And the way they apply sexuality in that film is grotesque, necessarily. It is itself body horror. It is penetrative in many ways. And it raises too many sort of ethical, moral, social questions in the kids' minds than I think they're ready for. And I think that I know that because I know my kids, but I'm not going to limit their exposure to Dead Ringers or Videodrome or anything else as they get older, once they have more experience with people. I think that with violence, you can have a violent scene where the malice is not necessarily against the person's self or emotions. There is a reason why we're not watching, like, torture movies with them. Mm-hmm. I would put those in the same boat as movies that have, like, more complex sexual relationships, because it requires more nuance on the part of the kid's understanding. And the outcomes, because of how the sex is done, the outcomes aren't necessarily romantic or emotionally productive. So, like, Terminators is romantic and emotionally productive. It is the great turning point in like The Dark Night of the Soul, like when they realize that Sarah has to become the hero and Kyle has to allow himself to let his guard down for them to both succeed. And they use that moment. That's great. I love it. But I will not digress any further. What are your thoughts on all that?
I agree. I think this, again, a little bit of this comes back to America's puritanical nature, because I think there would be more sexual content that we would feel comfortable with the kids seeing if America was less puritanical. So I think what you see is...
We as a family, or we in like a broader cultural sense?
Both.
Okay.
Like, right. I think because people are very hesitant to show kids with anything with any kind of sexual content, you don't really get sex scenes in things unless they are intended for adults. Mm-hmm. And when they're intended for adults, I feel like it is much more likely for the sex scenes to be, one, either sort of very psychologically complex, mm-hmm. or sort of titillating, or kind of heightened in one way or another.
Right.
Because if they aren't those things, there's kind of not a point to put them in the movie. Right? Yeah. Like, just sort of purely loving, happy sex.
Purely loving, happy sex is kind of a plot beat, whereas the titillation is like the cherry on top. In some cases, it's part of the subgenre. Like, you know, look at 90s horror movies. There are boobs and butt and all sorts of stuff all over every single one. Zombie movies, oh man, you gotta have boobs, right? Like, yeah. Linnea Quigley made a career off of that, like Night of the Demons, and yeah. Anyway, but yes.
So I think, like you said, with a lot of the movies that have sex scenes, it's just sort of a level of adult emotional complexity that the kids are probably not going to get,
right,
and not enjoy. And you know, so things, I immediately thought of Terminator, like. Mm-hmm. And then we also showed them A Fish Called Wanda, which has a lot of sex scenes.
Yes.
But again, some of those, like, are two people legitimately falling for each other.
Yeah.
And the rest are humorous, and it is a pretty easy, she doesn't really want to be with this guy, but she's kind of using him.
Yeah.
But not in some, like...
And then Go is like, why do they you know, scream like that or whatever, and it's like, because sex feels good, right?
Yeah.
And I think kids can get it. Like, you just say, when you have sex with somebody, it can just feel physically good, even when you're not like super emotionally invested in the relationship. And you don't need to be super emotionally invested in a relationship to have sex with somebody, and that is okay. Mm-hmm. You know, like part of this has to be, as parents, maybe using these media moments and, you know, picking and choosing, like with A Fish Called Wanda and Otto and slapping himself with Wanda's boot, you know, like to show the breadth of human experience in that regard. Like, I'm not going to show the kids Irreversible, right?
No.
Or Enter the Void, right? Or like, you know, Requiem for a Dream, but we'll show them A Fish Called Wanda. And there's even a bit of sexual violence, lightly, but a sexual violence in Blade Runner, where we actually had to tell the boys, yeah, that sort of scene is a bit problematic and these days it wouldn't necessarily have been made. And we're watching Neon Genesis Evangelion, and there's a lot of like weirdly like Japanese teen boy focused sexualization of all the women in the story. And it's really ridiculous. To the point where when the boys first saw the credits, I can't remember which of them said, why are there so many naked women on the credits? I mean, it's like, it really just like plays that card over and over again. And it's needless. It doesn't add to the story, but it's of a time. And it's an opportunity for us to talk about it. Right? If we were to watch Naked Gun, nice beaver, I just had it stuffed. We can explain that joke to the kids. Mm-hmm. They've seen us naked. They know what body hair is. Be like, oh, a beaver is a name, for a woman's vagina. And, their heads wouldn't explode. They wouldn't run into the room crying. And we would just have to make sure that, Go doesn't start saying that in public. But he's, again, proven that he doesn't do that sort of thing. As long as we frame it, that is something, that sort of nickname is something that you don't say to people.
Yeah.
That they get away with it because of the kind of comedy they're doing. But that's not necessarily how people are supposed to act in the real world, which is why we can watch it and think it's funny and laugh our butts off, but we wouldn't actually copy the people doing it. It's an opportunity for parenting.
Yeah.
I think it's missed for some parents. All
of this also, it should be clear that both of our kids are aware of the reality of sex. So I wasn't there. I'm very disappointed. At some point they did ask you about it and you let them know how all that works. But I kind of didn't pull punches either.
And I explained it really succinctly. I think it was like a minute or less, and I was anatomically correct. And I kind of I added in the emotions. I was actually kind of proud. It was pretty succinct.
Yeah.
I know for me, that's a big deal.
I'm sure you did a great job. But I think the other thing that I've noticed when I've tried to explain things is I think part of this is also developmental. So, I think part of this is that when it comes to violence, kids have a relationship to all the emotions needed to understand that.
Mm-hmm.
Not to the adult level, but kids understand anger. They understand feeling like they've been wronged.
For vengeance.
They definitely understand the need for vengeance. I think at certainly a more simplified level, but kids can get all of those emotions. And what's been interesting talking with the kids about sex is that, and all kids hit these things at different points, right? But they can understand some of the feelings around sex, but I don't think they get sexual desire yet in any sort of way that they could kind of apply that. And I certainly see that in their comprehension of some things. So I think that's the other side that I've had to be thoughtful about, because they understand love, I think they get the concept of maybe one day wanting to be married to somebody and what that is all about. But at least for our kids at this moment, that other whole sort of adult side, they don't have access to that in their understanding. And so there are parts of this that they are not going to get. So, we read To Kill a Mockingbird together, and part of that story centers around a rape. And so I had to try to explain what that was. And I think I did a pretty good job. But, there's, and I don't even know how well I do explaining it to an adult who needed it explained, but there are elements of that adult experience where it's I had to say, sexual violence can be hard for people and vulnerable in a way that goes beyond even other violence. And you just kind of have to take my word for that. You know what I mean? I don't think they, luckily, have nothing in their experience that would really let them comprehend that emotion or why that would be so hard, right? So I just had to say, you just got to trust me on this one. And, so I think some things like in a lot of movies, like, how can you be really attracted to somebody who you don't like? Like that kind of sexual desire that like can make you deeply desire somebody who you also, have like really mixed feelings about. Like there are parts of this that like they do not and probably should not have access to, right? So that just kind of limits what they can understand. When I was thinking about this, my mom is so great. She like listens to every episode twice and gives us her thoughts on it, which is so ridiculously marvelous. And I was talking to her the last night, and because we had talked about violent media, and she said, "Oh, were you mainly talking about the stuff that your dad showed you?" Because I did watch a lot of stuff with my dad, but a little bit when I was older after they had gotten divorced. And I said, no, yes, but no. Like, if you remember, when I was a kid, my two favorite movies were Witness and Time Bandits. And she said, oh, yeah, okay, yeah. No, I was part of that, wasn't I? And I was like, yeah, we watched a lot of different stuff. And we've shown the boys Witness. I love that movie. But that... And I was just pondering it this morning, and it was like, at some point when I was in college, I should have written a whole paper about Harrison Ford and like the trope of his like angry romantic feelings towards women in movies.
Okay.
It is such a weird, disturbing thing. Like, think of like him angrily kissing women is like,
yes,
is such an iconic thing. And I'm like, why is this? Like, this should have been missed opportunity.
Yes.
But I think I love that movie. And when I showed it to the boys, like I did a lot of work setting that up because I knew that scene when the kid is in the bathroom alone and sees the murder, like that is the kind of violence that could be very disturbing. So I talked to them about it in advance to make sure that like that wouldn't be too scary for them. But I think when I was a kid, like, I think that relationship between him and Rachael was confusing,
Yeah.
Like, that was a type of adult sexuality that I was like, ooh, I have questions, So, and that wasn't a bad thing. I don't feel scarred by that, right? But I think it's like a small example of why this does become more difficult.
Yeah.
And why you have to be thoughtful.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also just such a wonderful movie, and the boys really enjoyed it. And so, I mean, we knew that moment was coming. And
yeah,
I'm glad we were both on the same page about in the moment. We were like, yeah, that's, don't necessarily do that to people, like throw them against a wall when they try to leave because you think what's better for them romantically. But it's a very interesting moment because Rachael doesn't know how to be a woman. She knows how to be this thing that's a product of her memories, but she doesn't necessarily know how to be a woman. She doesn't have that command of her sexuality and herself.
Oh, I don't think that's true. And I don't think that's true. And I think that I'm trying to give the writers the benefit of the doubt. Understand, I'm speaking from the standpoint of the people making the film, because we were both on the same page as to maybe him not doing that. But let's say back up in their minds that she needed like kind of a nudge to be this human being, and that because all Rick knows essentially is violence. That's his world. Is he uses violence to help get like a positive reaction, a healthy relationship, or as healthy a relationship as the world will allow out of it. But there is definitely like that forget it, Jake, it's Chinatown sort of bit where, I mean, like it's a broken world and these are all broken people and they're going to do broken things to each other. But yeah, Rachael was innocent.
And I
Oh, no. I totally disagree.
And I have a
totally
hard time
disagree.
With what?
In that scene, her turning towards him naked is totally inviting him in.
Turning towards him naked.
Remember he sees her showering at the end?
Okay, sorry. I got distracted. I thought we were talking about Blade Runner. Hi.
No, Blade Runner is totally problematic.
Yes. Oh, no.
Would not do it.
No, yes. Sorry. Multiple Harrison Fords, multiple Rachels.
Yes. I think her name's Rachael. And
Which I think is very interesting if true. But no, yes, that's a wonderful moment because, for all of their puritanical nature, she is very in touch with herself as a woman. And Kelly McGillis is so riveting in that role. That she walks that like razor's edge between, being Amish and also like being an actual woman who can stand in front of Book, be a woman, and know what she's going to get out of him as a man. It is really cool moment. But I loved watching
also going back to last week, amazing mom portrayal. Like such a convincing portrayal of a mom.
Yes.
The fear that she expresses towards her, when her son's in danger.
Elijah, is that his name? Like, I know it's Elijah Wood, but what's the boy's name?
It's not.
Isn't it one of those?
No, it's not Elijah Wood.
Or whatever. Like, what's his name? Lucas Haas. Well, what's his? What's the boy's name?
Samuel.
Is it Elijah?
Samuel.
Anyway,
Samuel. Yeah.
One of those biblical names.
Mm-hmm.
You know how the Amish do. Yeah, sorry for that. I was getting lost in like thinking about.
The kisses are very similar. I think that really has more to do with Harrison Ford.
Don't
than with
that.
The plot
He's
of any movie. He is.
May he live forever.
He's got a thing, dude. He's got a thing.
At least back in the 80s, I think he's changed. We should email Callista Flockhart and see what's going on.
Oh my God. Yeah.
But yeah, so sorry, that is absolutely my bad. Yeah, we were talking totally cross purposes. I was talking about one Rachel, you were talking about another, and you're like, wait, what? Yeah. I totally get your pushback now. But yeah, like there is, in both cases though, they're complex.
Yeah.
And in both cases, they required in the moment massaging of the narrative so the boys could process it. And I think that is truly one of the magical things about parenting, is that when you really, really apply yourself, there are very few things in the media landscape that are off limits. We're not going to watch hostile, like torture porn. We're not going to watch movies that like center around sexual violence. But in both cases, those have to do with abusing the person and stripping away the self, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that is something that is hard for the kids to process, because I think that just takes life experience. So, I think that it's definitely a time and place sort of thing, but I definitely don't think it is off limits, just like as a whole. And yeah, I love looking for those films together and us saying like, we could watch this with the kids. And again, as part of their experience, the more we watch with them, the broader the sense of what is possible they get. And also, I think they get tools and language they can use to help work through what they see and to put it into context, right? And to give themselves an increasingly complicated, or not complicated, but complex framework upon which they can rest new depictions of sex and violence. And they have more boxes, I guess is a good analogy, more boxes they can put things in. And we can say, oh, what I just saw, I can put in the Die Hard box and I can put in the Blade Runner box. Or, oh, I can put this in the Aliens box and in the Nightmare on Elm Street box. And not that we've seen Nightmare on Elm Street with the boys yet, because the idea of this supernatural creature haunting you in your dreams is not something that Go needs to be a part of his lexicon.
And I do hope that the fact...
even though the violence, the actual physical violence in the film, I think they would be fine with.
Yeah.
It's totally the concept of Freddy Krueger.
Yeah.
Which is so interesting, and I think would be another conversation.
What I do hope is the fact that we have watched things and have been happy to discuss them lets them know that this isn't, speaking of sex, isn't a topic that's something to be scared of.
Right.
And it's okay to talk about it. And it's okay to talk with us about it. And I hope, as they get older and will be thinking about more complex things.
And as they're discovering
it makes those
who they
discussions, I hope it'll make those discussions easier.
No, that's a good thing. That's a good way of putting it, Moms, because, I see these, like in discussing in my various groups online, as we all do, trans issues, as we all do, seeing the complaints about, teachers and school administrators hiding, quote unquote, a child's use of pronouns from their parents. How dare they? That's my child. I need to know. And like there seems like on the conservative side of things, it seems there's a tendency to be really pissed off because you feel this proprietary ownership, right? This ownership of your child and your child's pronouns in this sort of really authoritarian sense. For me, and thinking about if my kid told teachers and classmates pronouns, but not us, my first impulse would not to be angry at the kid or the school administrators, but at who? Me, myself.
Mm-hmm.
Because I have fomented some sort of circumstance in which my child is not comfortable talking to me about these things that have to do with their sexuality and their identity and their gender. And that would break my heart that I let my kid down. And so I guess now moving forward, I am going to use these sort of media depictions of sex and gender, especially once we start watching Drag Race and We're Here. I cannot wait to watch We're Here with the boys. I think they are going to learn so much about so many things with that. The Selma episode, good Lord. Yeah. Anyway, that this will help kind of hopefully maybe insulate, strengthen our relationship with the boys so they feel increasingly confident and talking about these things as they come up in their own hearts and minds. Because that's important. And I think you can sort of flip the whole potential taboo narrative on its head. And instead of being afraid of it because it's something that we should be afraid of, instead, don't appeal to tradition. Talk about the things through the depictions and use it as a chance for your kid to see that, you're a cool parent who lets them see more adult fare, but you're also a caring, open parent who wants to know what they think about these things that are complicated and you value their positions. That's all I got to say about that.
I can't say it any better.
Yeah, you probably could. But thank you for that. And I'm sorry again for completely losing the plot with Harrison Ford. The double Rachael thing, I haven't put it together until now, and now it's something I cannot unknow. I cannot unknow it, and it will haunt me moving forward.
Yes.
In fact, if I ever meet Harrison Ford, I'll be like, okay, so in the 80s, Rachael. Archetype? Anyway. But no, I absolutely won't. I love Harrison Ford. Anyway.
So I think that's where we need to wrap things up. So as always, we need to thank Jonathan Zalben and First Frame Music for the music. Also, I've been meaning to say this the last 3 episodes. We have actually had a little uptick in listeners, which is awesome.
Yay!
It gives me the fair certainty that it is not simply my family listening to the podcast. What that also means is if you are listening and there is anything you want us to talk about, we still
let us know.
So few listeners that if you ask us to talk about it, it is basically 100% certain
yes,
that we will talk about it.
Help us program the show.
100%. I guarantee we will talk about
that.
it.
That's wild. Yeah, so, get it on the ground floor.
Oh, really? So if there's anything...
Be a repeat suggester. Be like one of those sort of like lurking in the shadows, parasocial personalities that future listeners will be like, oh, yeah, Rudy in Arkansas. Talk about you in hallowed tones.
If there's something that you are... want us to talk about more or think we got wrong or you'd like to hear us talk about it.
I love whole you got it wrong thing. I'm in love with that. Let us know when we go sideways and we didn't realize it.
We guarantee we will address it. So moms and pops at thefamilyskeptical.com. And that's it.
Yeah, I think that wraps up this episode of The Family Skeptical, where nothing is sacred except for our kids.
Okay, take it away.
Okay.
Oh, I take it away. Never mind.
There you go.